China has emerged as a major competitor to the United States' long dominance of advanced technologies and manufacturing. It wasn't supposed to be this way. China was supposed to manufacture cheap plastic consumer goods for Walmart, while sophisticated American companies dominated in high-tech, pharmaceuticals, and other highly technical industries. China has made it clear that its manufacturing prowess is part of its geopolitical ambitions, especially in the global south. A bright spot in this gloomy scenario is the vaunted U.S. innovation ecosystem, that complex web of advanced education, clusters of high-tech corporations, skilled scientists and researchers, and a U.S. government that practiced interventionist industrial policy in that uniquely American way, often through military procurement. Unfortunately, President Donald Trump is taking a meat cleaver to that ecosystem. He is attacking universities, sending home thousands of foreign students, and gutting federal government programs. David G. Victor is a professor of innovation and public policy at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at University of California, San Diego. He has written, "Trump is Killing American Innovation, and China Will Reap the Benefits," which appeared in Foreign Affairs on May 28th. He warns that stripping the innovation engine that has powered U.S. economic and military strength since World War II would be suicidal, just as China's decades-long state-backed effort is maturing. He joined me from California to discuss his article. Welcome to the interview, David.
It's great to be back.
Well, look, over the last couple 3 years, I've had I don't know how many American entrepreneurs on who are working on startups. A lot of them come out of the universities, and one of the questions I always ask them is, China has got a huge lead right now in electrotech manufacturing, and can the Americans use their vaunted innovation ecosystem to eventually narrow the gap and catch up with China? And they've all been very positive. They said, yes, I think we'll do it. We won't be on scale necessarily, but innovation. Now your paper is arguing that Trump is essentially dismantling that ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge concern. I still have tremendous confidence in the American ecosystem. It's highly entrepreneurial. There's tremendous incentives to come up with new ideas. People can fail fast and often. All of that's incredible. But a huge amount of the American innovation system depends on public support in various forms, especially in the early stages of new technologies. And that's the part that's being dismantled. Don't think it's being dismantled because they're trying to generate lots of own goals. I think it's being dismantled because they're at war with universities and culture wars and things like that. But the collateral damage is the innovation system, and we're just beginning to see that happen, and it could get a lot worse very quickly.
Can it survive 4 years of Trump? I mean, another president could come in and say, look, this is a mistake. We're going to roll all these cuts back and restore the funding. Will that be enough?
The damage will be generational. So I mean, will it survive? In some fundamental sense, it'll survive. There'll still be people with a pulse at the end of it. Will it survive in the way that it's been able to operate, where even when a administration proposes low budgets for National Science Foundation or for the Department of Energy, the supporters of innovation in Congress come up and put that money back into the budget. And so what happens is we bump along, and with federal funding for research and development, which is one indicator, not the only way the federal government supports new ideas. Federal funding's been roughly flat. Private sector's been increasing its funding in huge ways, but a lot of that private sector support has come in areas computing, IT more generally. Now we see AI, and especially biotech and biology. Those are all areas where the private money is being crowded in because there's already a vibrant innovation system in the country, and that's the big risk, is that sure, Trump people could shut this off, other people could bring it back in, but is the United States a place for folks to go and to invest, or are there going to be other places, including the Canadian innovation system, Australia, Europe? I've heard, anecdotally, lots of people talking about how they're going to pick off scientists and move them to other places, China itself. Um, those places become more attractive the more unattractive the United States gets.
One of the points that you make in your paper, in your article, which is Trump is killing American innovation and China will reap the benefits. It's in Foreign Affairs this month. one of the points you make is that this system essentially dates back to World War II and was the foundation for the growth of America's industrial might, industrial power over the last 80 years. And one of the things that Mariana Mazzucato is one of my favorite economists, and she says, don't look at what the Americans do when they talk about free enterprise. Look at all that support, the public support for innovation and science and education. That's the foundation of that innovation ecosystem. And I assume you would agree.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think Mariana's argument is correct. The United States for a long time has said it doesn't do industrial policy, and depending on that, how you parse the words, big support for innovation is a kind of industrial policy. And since we've become concerned about problems like climate change, other kinds of problems, onshoring of U.S. manufacturing, we've been even more active in not just supporting innovation, but also supporting the deployment of these technologies. There's always this risk that government's going to misspend this money, and so when you just sprinkling money on any problem you can identify doesn't solve the problem and isn't necessarily good use of public resources. But I think the really big story is not only has the U.S. government played a big role in this, but for the most part, it's done a pretty good job. There are other actors that have done a good job as well. There's growing evidence that philanthropy, for example, is extremely good at taking risks in some fields of science and applying those ideas to developing new technologies and ultimately whole new lines of business. So all that's encouraging, but the federal government has played a really key role.
Um, you say that there are three pillars that underpin U.S. technological leadership: federal R&D support, global talent, open markets. How is Trump dismantling those three pillars?
Yeah, so he's dismantling on all three fronts. So first of all, federal support for R&D. Federal government's not the only supporter of R&D. There are some businesses where private industry has an incentive to invest a lot in basic research, and that brings products directly to market. Biotech is probably the most famous example, but a lot in computing and some other areas. Some states spend a lot of money. When we had the whole stem cell drama at the federal level and the federal government basically shut off support, my state, California, stepped in, built a pretty vibrant innovation system. But somebody's got to pay for it. And fundamentally, that early stage technology and development of new ideas is something the federal government has played a key role in. That's one. Second is people. I mean, this part of the story is really most distressing as an American because we have very, very quickly through a war on immigrants, just dismantled the engine of our innovation system. It's not just money, it's people, it's graduate students. We're a huge net importer of brains from India, from China. China's the most famous case, the biggest numbers. Some fields of engineering are reliably more than half of all the PhD students who do a lot of the work. They don't just get an education, they do a lot of the work. They turn into postdocs, they turn into employees, creators of companies. The story is well told over and over again. They're foreigners. And we're hostile to foreigners on visas, on the overall tone, harassing people at the borders. You hear anecdotally about these stories that trickle back, and it affects whether mothers let their children come to the United States instead of going to some other place. So that's the second. And then the third is the market. The United States is a big market on its own. China's a big market on its own. So big countries can kind of get away with a lot of mischief, but they benefit from being able to allow new ideas to find markets, to find customers. If you're a small country, you really have no choice. You have to have open borders. But if you're a big country, you can get along with your own market to some point, but it shelters your innovators from global competition. It makes you not the best always. And that's the concern right now. It's not just tariffs and the flaky tariff policy. It's this Orwellian concept of foreign entities of concern, which makes it hard for people in other countries to invest in the United States, notably China, but not only China. It's all this gumming up of trade agreements and expectations around trade agreements, such that people don't know reliably how to invest. Even if you are thinking about investing in something that would onshore technology in the United States, and you're looking at penciling out the economics, and tariffs are key for that. You don't know if your tariffs are going to be there tomorrow, and so that kind of mixture of hostility to foreigners and chaos, with a big dose of chaos, that's what's really undermining the U.S. innovation system.
David, my impression of participating in the Canadian energy debate is that the ignorance of what China has done in the last 10, 15 years, how technologically advanced it is, how advanced it is in terms of electric technologies that are leading the energy transition is really abysmal. And do you find the same lack of understanding? And the reason I bring this up is because China is now our competitor. And if we don't understand the competition, this is basic, business 101. If you don't understand your competition, you're going to go under. That's, and I don't think Canada and the United States understand their competition very well.
I think that's right. I can't speak for Canada, but I can, even a lot of experts in the United States don't understand. This is not our parents' China. It's not even our uncles and aunts' China. This is the China. I first went to China in the early 2000s, and there still were lots of bicycles in the street in Beijing. This is a totally different country. It's a country that's at the frontier in many, many fields of engineering. They've had all this innovation and clean tech that you mentioned. They're the reason solar is cheap. Your manufacturing revolution in China is solar has been a global technology and is available now everywhere in the world at some of the lowest costs because the innovations have been treated globally. They started in the United States and Japan, they went to Germany, then they went to China. And that story is being replicated over and over again. It's happening in electric vehicles right now and they're it's not just low quality imitators. It's technological frontier or close to the technological frontier. So it's a really different picture. It means we need to prepare ourselves for that kind of competition. The reason I wrote this article in Foreign Affairs, which is not normally a place where you see stuff about innovation, is because this affects the geoeconomic capacity of the United States and indeed the West. And with that, it affects their ability to project power and to organize the status quo and to create order. So it's a big seismic change in the global order.
What are the, I went back and I read a number of speeches, people like Gina Raimondo, the former Secretary of Commerce, Brian Dees, the head of the national, whatever the council is that advises the president, President Biden. And there was it's striking the extent to which they understood that energy and technology and innovation are part of China's geopolitical strategy. And so the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act, and a lot of other legislation had a national security component to it. And one could almost argue that national security was one of the big drivers of American industrial policy under Biden. And so they got the issue of China's geopolitical ambitions and how to counter it. And the Trump administration seems totally clueless about that. Not to be, I don't mean to be ungenerous, but that's what it looks like from north of the border.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that they're clueless. There are a lot of different forces in the Trump administration. You have the ultra right-wing anti-woke folks who want to dismantle universities. You have other people who might see some kind of strategy here. If you dismantle the university system, then there's opportunities for private investors to swoop in. That seems far-fetched to me, although some of that's happening right now. You see other people who are not really aware of the Chinese threat and the intensity of the Chinese threat. See other people who want to create American industries don't seem to be aware of how long it's going to take. So you put all that together, that's a huge, huge problem for the United States. I think it's short-sighted. I think it is interesting, as you say, that the Biden team talked about this in national security terms. It's no accident that Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, gave among the more important speeches, reflecting what the Biden team was doing. They were coming from the national security side of the House. I think that's also good politics. That's one of the reasons you can get the votes for these kinds of policies. And frankly, one of the reasons the working title of the paper ended up being published with a different title was "This is how China wins." This is how China wins. As you think you're running off creating American industry and undoing your friends on the left in universities, and instead what you're doing is harming the ability of the United States to compete.
Yeah, it's become clear to me that China has had a pretty well thought out strategy for the last 20 years on the industrial policies, how it would support both demand and supply, and how it would it had an export policy. Now they're talking about China's industrial diplomacy, in places like in the global south. And they seem focused, strategic, and willing to pour enormous resources into this. Not only the fact to get them ahead, which where they are now, in at least in the energy technologies, but to stay ahead for the long term. Boy, that doesn't bode well for the United States, one would think.
I think so. It's also important that we not, treat China with rose-colored glasses. I mean, it is the case they spent a lot of money. They've also wasted a lot of money. They built massive overcapacity. Part of the political problems that China has for the rest of the world right now is you build capacity, and that allows them to drive down costs in uneconomic ways, and that's creates economic tensions, political tensions. And on top of it, they've got a debt-heavy infrastructure system, big role for the state, so that makes it harder to innovate. So there are a lot of flaws in the Chinese system. I don't want to be clear about that. But they have stayed the course and they've built these industries and they've become globally competitive in doing that. And it's very impressive.
Well, let's talk about Europe for a moment because you argue that Europe, looking at what Trump is doing, it kind of see a bit of a vacuum here that they're moving in to fill.
Yeah, they're trying to move into fill. We'll see. Europe also has a lot of structural challenges. I think there are at least two fronts that really matter in the European response. One is the recognition of the flakiness of the American security guarantees through NATO and other kinds of arrangements. And that's leading the Europeans to spend more money, including money raised by debt, like in Germany, on defense. That's probably good for the European economy, good for the European defense industry, probably good for Europe's defense as well, probably also good for Ukraine. And then on top of it, you got this big economic reform that is being attempted. The kind of set piece of this is the Draghi report that came, Mario Draghi's report that came out last fall, laid out all these different things that need to happen in Europe to change to help Europe become more competitive. The politics of that reform are really, really challenging.
Well, David, thank you very much for this. This has been fascinating, and we look forward to, I'll catch up to you a little sooner than 3 or 4 years next time.
I look forward to that, and I hope my travel plans were a little less chaotic, and our next interview isn't with me in the back of a car.